Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I was 20 years old when I got a job as the manager of a small colonial-style hotel in the city. The hotel had 40 rooms, a grand staircase, and an eerie charm. The owner suggested that I stay at the hotel during the work week to save on commuting time, which seemed like a good idea. On my first day, I packed enough clothes for a few days and arrived at the hotel in the early morning. The staff greeted me warmly, and I was handed the key to room 11, already been prepared at the owner's request. The hotel had a modest staff of 8, 2 servers, 3 housekeepers, a cook, and some kitchen staff. Surprisingly, there was no security or doorman, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After settling in, I was given a tour of the hotel by Dennis, one of the servers. The hotel had a peculiar layout, with long hallways, high ceilings, and marble floors. As we walked, I noticed a small doorbell at the entrance that rang every time someone entered. It was a distinct mechanical ding, a remnant of an earlier time. We passed through the second floor, where I saw a strange, sealed-off passageway at the end of the hall. The marble floor in front of it had a large, discolored stain as if something had burned there long ago. Dennis didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. There was something unsettling about it, but I brushed it off and continued the tour. Dennis led me up to the 3rd floor, explaining the layout. He had worked here for 5 years and knew the place inside and out. We reached the staff rooms on the 4th floor, where I noticed something odd. The beds were all tethered to the floor with thick ropes. I found this bizarre, but again, I didn't question it at the time. At lunch, the kitchen was bustling with activity. The head cook, a grumpy old man, seemed irritated by my presence, especially when I tried talking to the other kitchen staff. He was distant, giving off an unfriendly vibe. Clara, the only female staff member, was more approachable and explained that most of the hotel's guests were long-term residents. In the afternoon, as I explored the hotel further, I noticed Dennis smoking outside by the garden. He looked troubled, but when I approached him, he quickly put out his cigarette and walked back inside without a word. The interaction left me feeling uneasy. Dennis left soon after that. His shift was over and he lived close by. I asked him to send coffee to my room before he left. When I returned later, it was waiting on a cart outside my door. The warmth of the cup felt comforting after a long day, but the hotel had taken on a different feel as night fell. Most of the staff had gone home by then. The guests retreated to their rooms, and the staff went about their duties. My room was comfortable, but felt unnervingly isolated. I watched TV for a while, dozing off here and there. Around 11:30 p.m., I was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of a car screeching to a stop. I wasn't sure if it was real or something on TV. Then I heard the hotel's entrance bell ring, a sharp mechanical ding. I got out of bed and opened the door, but the hallway was empty. There was no sign of anyone at the entrance. Confused, I returned to my room, but the unsettling feeling lingered. I lay back down, trying to sleep. But just as I was drifting off, I heard the sound of glass shattering. It seemed to come from the floor above, where the staff rooms were located. I rushed upstairs, knocking on the door of the staff quarters. When they opened the door, I saw something strange. Each of them was tied to their beds with ropes, just as I had noticed earlier. This time, it sent a chill down my spine. I asked if they had heard the glass shattering, but they all shook their heads, looking at me like I was the crazy one. Feeling unnerved, I went back to my room, but as I descended the stairs, I saw a woman in a wedding dress standing at the end of the hallway. She looked ghostly pale, her eyes vacant. "Could you get me some water?" she asked, her voice soft and distant. It was Clara. Confused and unsettled, I walked to the storage room on the 4th floor to fetch a bottle of water, but when I returned, she was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, but the hallway was empty. I hurried back to my room, my mind racing with questions. Sleep was impossible that night. The next morning, I stumbled out of bed, exhausted and disoriented. Clara greeted me with a cheerful smile as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, sir," she said, as if the night before hadn't been a surreal nightmare. I wanted to ask her about what I had seen, but something held me back. Instead, I asked about Dennis, hoping for some answers. She told me he wasn't coming in today, and that knot in my stomach tightened further. There were too many unanswered questions. That night, the bell rang again, waking me up from a shallow sleep. I checked my phone. It was 11:45 p.m. I opened my door and saw a guest heading up the stairs. It was the woman in the wedding dress, gliding silently up to the third floor. My blood ran cold as I watched her disappear into the sealed-off passageway. I'd had enough. Something was deeply wrong with this place. I texted the owner claiming I was sick and needed to leave. I packed my things in a daze and booked a taxi. As I lay in bed at home, the familiar sound of screeching tires jolted me awake. My phone lit up, 3:30 a.m. A wave of dread washed over me. Before I could react, I saw a figure standing in the corner of my room.
There's no time.
It was a tall, dark silhouette, black as night but solid. It had no head. Panic gripped me, but I couldn't move. I remembered something my grandfather once told me. "If you ever see a ghost, curse it." With all my strength, I screamed profanities at the figure. My voice was barely audible, but I kept shouting. The figure circled closer, and I felt the air grow heavier, suffocating. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. I bolted out of bed, drenched in sweat, and ran to my father's room. He was startled awake, and I told him everything. We searched my room together, but nothing seemed out of place. My mattress was soaked with sweat, but there was no sign of the dark figure. The next day, I returned to the hotel, determined to find answers. The staff went about their day as usual, but something felt different. I asked about Clara, but one of the servers looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. Later, the head cook called me into his office. He handed me an old photograph, yellowed with age. It was a wedding photo. There was Clara in her wedding dress, standing next to Dennis. "They weren't staff," the cook said, his voice grim. "They were guests. 10 years ago." Clara and Dennis were guests, honeymooners. One night, they heard screams and the sound of glass breaking. Clara had caught fire and, in her panic, ran to the rooftop water tank where she died. Her body was found in the water tank on the roof. Dennis hung himself in the room. His body was too heavy, his head separated from the noose. After learning the hotel's grim history, everything fell into place with a bone-chilling clarity. Clara, the ghostly bride, would appear around 11:30 p.m., just as the bell rang its hollow chime. Like clockwork, she wandered the halls in her tattered wedding dress, her lifeless eyes seeking something lost long ago. She'd approach anyone unlucky enough to cross her path, softly asking for water, her voice echoing like a whisper from the grave. But her hauntings didn't stop there. Each night, she drifted toward the staff quarters, her pale, cold fingers yanking the terrified staff from their beds, forcing them to relive the terror she endured. The sight of her spectral form, silently pulling them from their tethered beds, had become a dreadful routine, one they couldn't escape, no matter how tight the ropes. And the dark, headless figure that had appeared so suddenly, that too had a name. Dennis, the headless shadow that stalked me, his presence suffocating and thick, was the man who had once loved Clara, now cursed to forever roam the same cursed hotel, unable to find peace, bound to her in death as he was in life. It all began to fall into place, though what truly transpired in that room remains a mystery. The haunting, the restless spirits, endlessly bound in their torment, seemed forever caught in a cycle of anguish and sorrow, reliving their tragedy with every eerie chime of the bell. I left the hotel that day and never returned. I searched for the job advertisement later, but I never found it again. It was as if the hotel and everything that happened had vanished.